Hi everyone, pardon me, it's William back with our journey with our friend Dmitri, and today we have a 1915 diary entry. It's really a beautiful sunny day here, and because of my ignorance of how to adjust my camera, paradoxically it's the sunny days that provide you the least magnificent view. In fact, it looks like, aside from this tree behind me, it really looks like the whole mountainside's been swallowed up by a cloud, which sometimes happens, but today that's just not the case. It's the opposite of that. So, what are you going to do? So we're doing a 1915 diary entry today. An important one, I think, even though on the surface it seems very mundane. But I thank all of you who watch these to the end. I feel like the commentary is how I justify doing these, how I justify putting someone's personal life in its entirety, not editing to only focus on the historical details, but going deeper than that, so that we can really have this as a journey with Dmitri. I think he wanted that. I could be wrong, but I think that was one of his motivations for writing these diary entries. And, we see how his mood fluctuates and how sometimes he's more confiding than others and reveals more. But we can also learn from the ones when he is not saying much. Sometimes you say a lot when you're not saying much. So personally, I don't think I would do it. I don't think I would just put the text out there and say, here, rummage around in this guy's life. Not that there's anything wrong with that when a person is doing personal research, but then to make it public on YouTube, that has to be justified in some way. I feel like that. I've talked about that before. So our 1939 recap was all about Leonard and about his offer, which Grunwald called quite modest, to Maria, of a certain amount of monthly support. And then the rest was Grunwald's advice to her about how she should approach other people and how she should parlay this modest offer of support into the kind of support that would be appropriate for an Imperial Highness, as Grunwald puts it, and his suggestions for her general strategy going forward. Okay, so the 1915 recap. Last time we were with Dmitri, it was some insight into his medical condition, not sort of really going into specific details, but we know now that he's being treated possibly for syphilis, and that the treatment consists of arsenic in some form. My guess would be salvarsan. Okay, our cast today, I'm leaning forward to reach my laptop. I should just bring it closer, I guess. Our cast today, we have a mysterious French novelist, who of course is not present, but is just mentioned. So here we go. It's the 7th/20th of January in Usovo. It's 2 to 3 degrees below zero. I'm not doing any conversion. I'm just saying that that's exactly what Dmitri writes in whatever scale he's using, 2 to 3 degrees below zero. There is a strong wind and it's snowing. Okay, here we go. I got up around 11 o'clock. Today I felt a little better in the morning, though my cough continues and my sense of taste is completely gone. I had coffee with Cook, and then we took rifles and went for a walk, but naturally we didn't see anything. We lunched at 1 o'clock, and around 2 o'clock, Cook left for Moscow. I'm just making a note here. Cook left for Moscow until tomorrow. I was left completely alone. I skied a little before tea, but quickly got tired and returned home and read until tea time. The book was La Blank. I can't make out the word. My French friends can't make, or my Russian colleagues can't make out the word. La it's a French novel by Pierre Margaret, and he spells that Marguerette, and with his handwriting, this is not a phonetic spelling, obviously, but with his handwriting, it's hard to say if that transcription is correct. And yeah, okay, I shouldn't be interrupting. Here we go, back to Dmitri. It's remarkably well written. I had tea at 5 o'clock, then read until it was time for dinner. I dined alone at 8 o'clock. Boring. I listened to gramophone music, then wanted to write a letter to Maria, but could not, and took up my book again, finishing it. I had tea and immediately went to bed. The news from the war is monotonous. The newspapers are obsessively excited about the Zeppelin attacks on English cities and the huge earthquake in Italy where 15,000 people were killed in a landslide. All right, so he's sleeping long hours, isn't he? Because he seems to be going to bed around midnight, maybe between midnight and 1 a.m., because tea is served at 11, and he always kind of just says, then I went straight to bed. So, yeah, he's sleeping. He's sleeping like 10, 12 hours, right? And tired also when he doesn't have somebody around, like Cook and Borya, to get him outside, really being active. And he tends not to be. Okay, what would cause his sense of taste to disappear? I tried to figure that out, but it's too much. There are too many things. I mean, if you Google that, there's a long list of drugs, of medications. I mean, not illicit drugs, but medications that can cause that side effect. And I didn't see it specifically related to arsenic-derived treatments, but God knows that would be my guess as to what was making his sense of taste disappear. We see from this and from other things that he's really just a casual hunter. He was a passionate golfer and model railroader, but he wasn't a passionate hunter. He's content to just, take his rifle out with him when he's on a walk, and if something comes along, then okay. If not, then he's not going to go out and try to track animals or, do the things that a really avid hunter would do. He liked animals a lot, so it doesn't surprise me that all men of his class were raised with hunting, but it just wasn't something that he was into big time. So what to say about the novel? Well, Dmitri tended to like French novels. I think Paul said once, not to me, but in an interview, that his favorite author was Jack London. And I also in various sources saw him sing the praises of Kipling. So that's far removed from French novels. But the French novels he was reading were not sort of the type that would have been considered ladies' novels, or trashy French novels. They were people like Anatole France and Paul Bourget, and in fact, he was the one who introduced me to those authors that I came to really appreciate once I dived into them. But, I did my best to find Pierre Margaret in any form of the possible spelling online, and I just couldn't come up with anything. So without having the title of the book, maybe it was a trashy French novel, though I doubt it, because he talks about how well written it was, and Dmitri knew literature. He knew what was what was a well written book and what wasn't. But if any of you have any suggestions, or if it rings a bell, please let me know. Of course, there are plenty of authors who sort of fall by the wayside. Paul Bourget has more or less, which is a pity because his books are really good. But, it would be rare for there to be no references at all on the internet, even to the most obscure novelists. So, I don't know. What next? Well, here we come to the deeper discussion. So, the war. So, just briefly, I'm not doing any. You all know how sometimes I really get into things on the political scene and other things that were going on with, I loved 1921, right, with everything that was going on politically and with various revolutionary movements and counter-revolutionary movements. But this time, I have a busy day today, and I'm really, it's my job to delve deeply into the Schatzalp history, and that's what I'm doing. And so I just haven't done any independent research. I just Googled it. So here's what I found on Google. I quote when I Googled Eastern Front 1915. I got, in January 1915, the Eastern Front of World War I saw intense fighting with the German and Austro-Hungarian forces attempting to push the Russian army back. The opening months of 1915 were marked by furious battles on either flank of the front, particularly around the Carpathian Mountains, where Austrian and Russian troops engaged in fierce winter combat. And I think it was going well for Russia against the Austrians. I think, because I think the Austro-Hungarian military forces were sort of at that point on the verge of collapse. But I am not sure about the time frame of that, and I wouldn't say things were necessarily, that notwithstanding, going splendidly for Russia, because Russia wasn't doing well against the Germans, as Dmitri knew personally. Then there was this earthquake. I didn't look up the Zeppelin attacks, which Dmitri says is what the newspapers are really focused on. And he was a newspaper junkie, so he was probably getting an English newspaper, even all the way out there in Usovo. Grand Dukes could do things like that. So what about the earthquake? I hadn't even known about it. And so here's what Google says: the 1915 Avezzano earthquake, also known as the Marsica earthquake, was a major earthquake that struck central Italy on January 13th, 1915, with a magnitude of 7.0. The earthquake caused widespread destruction and resulted in an estimated 30,000 fatalities. So once the dust settled, it was more than, it was twice as much as what Dmitri cites. The epicenter was located in the Fucino Basin, which included the city of Avezzano. Okay. Horrible. I didn't know about that at all for such a disastrous thing. So he's being very bland about these things. And maybe you remember back in there was an earthquake also in 1906, and he was much more sympathetic at that point to the people who were involved and, talking about how horrible it was. This time, no. So I would say, this is probably Dmitri at his least likable, So let's call this the nadir, if I pronounce that correctly. Let's call it the low point in the diaries. Maybe not the single low point, because the rest of the rest of the winter of 1915 is pretty much the same way. But it seems to me, the irony being, from everything that Grunwald is telling us, it seems to me that Dmitri was much more self-centered in 1915 than he was in 1939. And the interesting thing for me is that I wouldn't call it the kind of it's selfishness, but I wouldn't call it the kind of reflexive narcissism that you have in the 21st century. As you all know, I'm a voracious reader, and it seems to me that not just in modern novels and books, but in journalism, in personal contacts with people, it seems to me that there's kind of a reflexive narcissism that we have in the 21st century that, you could use the word meta, right? M-E-T-A, where people who are not monstrously selfish, who are nice people, are nonetheless caught up in this phenomena of sort of analyzing everything you do as you're doing it. And if you write a journalistic piece or you write a creative piece, you are just automatically in this mode of analyzing everything through your own perspective, in relation to yourself. And it seems to me that even selfish people in the 20th century were more outward looking. They weren't, simply analyzing bringing everything back to themselves always. And, not, as I say, not even because the people now are necessarily selfish or conceited, just because that is the style and the flow that they're surrounded by, that they've been raised in. So if any of you find that interesting, you can tell me what you think about that. So let's look at sort of the trajectory of Dmitri's development, because those of you that watched the 1906, 1907 diary entries when he was between 14 and 16, he was so sympathetic at that age. He was such a little thing who was trying to bear the weight of the world on his shoulders and to take on other people's worries and disappointments, and and we saw how this tendency in him to be very grand and also to lose his temper and be angry, that the people around him, to their credit, really worked with him on that. And he responded to it and said, yeah, okay, they're right, and I'm going to work harder on this. And I find that so endearing about him. But it kind of seems that there was this gradual decline then. Once he became independent, more or less independent, I mean, Laming was always with him, but once he was acknowledged to be an adult, and people, even Laming, didn't have the right anymore to take him aside as they would a boy and say, look, your behavior is unacceptable and you are going to change it, or else, kind of a thing. They couldn't do that anymore. And he was this wealthy, handsome young man, with women throwing themselves at his feet, and he had anything he wanted he could get. He could buy fancy cars. And, he didn't have a father or a mother there on the scene in his life. So, even with this entourage and these people who, as I talked before, sort of wanted to infantilize him, and they did, but they couldn't take him to task the way they had really conscientiously done when he was a boy. So, he's a young man in his early 20s who's at loose ends. And this is the time, as you all know, in 1912, when there was the alleged engagement, which seems to have been a real thing with Grand Duchess Olga, with Nicholas and Alexandra's daughter, which was broken off because of the parents' disapproval of the way Dmitri was behaving, and the relationship with Nicholas began to be more strained. And by 1914, there's this incident that he refers to in a letter to Nicholas that he writes from Sicily about, I was such a jerk, and I flew off the handle, and I was just behaving in an unacceptable way. And so 1914, things are sort of starting to go a bit in the other direction. He's sort of having this realization that he's not heading in the right direction. Then World War II starts. He has this horrible battlefield experience, with obviously some degree of shell shock. And that's a setback. And then we pick him up. So that was August 1914, and we catch up again with him in January 1915. And we could literally sit here and make a list of excuses for the way he's talking about what's going on in the war, as though it's just some abstract thing. And too bad, right now it's kind of boring. I wish they would stop focusing on the Zeppelins. And yeah, there was this earthquake, and yeah, ho-hum, So, yeah, we could make a list of excuses. There was the trauma from the invasion of East Prussia. That's a real thing. There was depression. There was the sense he had all his life when he was under stress or on the verge of one of his deep depressions, of trying to push any negative thoughts out of his mind. And it's extraordinary that this is the first mention he's made of the war. So I think that comes into play. There's the burnout that everybody gets, I guess, after being intensely focused on something. I mean, you see it with Ukraine. Intensely focused on what's going on with something, and then it just, unless you're there, it just kind of, it's hard to keep up the same level of focus on that. There's his youth. He was only 23 years old. He was very young. But the real change back to the good trajectory kind of starts in the autumn of 1950, when Nicholas decides to take over as commander-in-chief, and things are going very badly for Russia. And it sort of starts clicking with Dmitri that, oh, this is horrible. This is horrible. I need to do something. He tried as hard as he could to intervene with Nicholas, and then of course we're on the path to the Rasputin assassination. And in a way, paradoxically, I mean, it sounds bad to say it, because you can't use the adjective good for something that hurt so many people, millions of people. But the revolution and the assassination of Rasputin, in a way, I think were very good for Dmitri. His reaction to the assassination was so much, he brought on such real remorse and such introspection that, he just wasn't the same person after that. And I think he was a sadder person, but I think in a good way. And also the revolution and having the rug pulled out from under him, and needing to, again, to take such a deep look at his life. And, it brought on horrible depression on the one hand, but on the other hand, it really took away what could have been a bad trajectory. I mean, he could have just gotten more and more selfish and more not uncaring, and, it could have been very bad for him. He could have turned into a sort of thoroughly unpleasant person if these events hadn't happened. But they kind of set him back again on the right track. Just because you can't call any person a bad person who's capable of the level of remorse that he had, and the level of self-criticism. So, not always in relationship to sex. That was kind of the one area where he seemed to give himself complete license. But with the gambling, with, the way he sometimes hurt other people, with that sort of thing, the regret and the remorse were there when his behavior didn't match what he thought it should be. So there was a priest that I had. He's no longer the priest, unfortunately, at Holy Trinity. He left to take a parish in California, and he used to remind us that being a human being is an aspiration. It's what we're all aiming for, to go beyond the sort of animal, reptilian brain and become more and more compassionate people and unselfish people. That was how he defined what a human being is, and that's always stuck with me. So Dmitri did have this aspiration to become a human being, and we see how he works at that. And I think for me, he's at his best at Shuts Up, despite what Grunwald is saying. And that was a period of life when, again, he was kind of at loose ends. But once he was at Schatzalp and he had this challenge for actual survival, he was really beloved here. People really considered him a likable, nice person. Anyway, what do we have next time? Well, we're going back to 1939, and we'll have the challenges that Dmitri had, according to Grunwald, with being, as a stateless person, being able to be and go, live and go where he wanted to live and go at any given time. So that will be the topic. Very interesting stuff. And I forgot to look ahead to the next diary entry for 1915, so I can't tell you what that is going to be like. But yeah, forgive me for being so long-winded this time. I hope you enjoyed it. Enjoyed it. As always, I would just love to hear your own comments on any of this. And yeah, I'll see you next time. Bye.